Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nick and Joe show. And I am not Nick. Nick is on. We're trying to catch up with Nick here, checking his sound.
Right.
And Joe, I am substituting in for Joe. My name is Chris Fraser. I was with you last week and enjoyed the experience very much. Saw some comments after the show, and I'm glad that people are enjoying the show. And we have a lot of great topics coming up for you today on the Nick and Joe show. So, Nick, let me test your microphone, like see how you're sounding right now. Hear a little bit of hissing.
All right. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we got some hissing on your microphone. So hopefully we can fix that very shortly.
All right. Well, I'll keep plugging away at it here. But
okay.
So why don't you get started, and I'll play with this and see if I can get it to work.
Okay, no problem. Well, folks, it is April, the merry month of April in Canada, and it's April everywhere. But I love April in Canada because it means that spring is in the air, and here where we're broadcasting from in Ottawa, we've had a wonderful day, about 15 degrees Celsius, which is great for walking out with a sweater or light windbreaker. The sun was out, so hey, this is my kind of spring. Let's hope this continues for a while. Now, I know our forecast says it's going to be rainy for the next couple of days, but hey, that's April. That's okay. But as long as those temperatures stay nice, I'm quite happy. And Nick and I were talking a while ago about the post-pandemic euphoria, how people are starting to feel like things are coming alive here. And in Ontario, we've dropped the mask mandates a few weeks ago. No more, very few COVID restrictions, except for in hospitals and special settings. So it's almost like we're getting back to the old normal of 2019. So Nick, any comments on that? You're still hissing a bit.
Yeah,
but
I was actually just going to say that what is interesting about it is I was out yesterday, and I went to Pembroke to get a battery for my tractor, and I was talking to the guy behind the counter, and I said, I don't know if it's me or if this is other people who notice this, but people seem to be in a better mood. There seem to be there's a lightness to their step now that wasn't there before, because, there's this whole burden has been lifted off their shoulders. Now, you think, how big a burden is a mask? Well, put up with it for 2 years, especially when you don't believe that it works. And a lot of people, I can't tell you the number of people say, I know this is a waste of time, but I do it because I don't want to cause a fuss. All right, well, that's fine. And businesses do have the right to determine under which conditions you will be able to conduct business with them. Just like the old no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? Well, now they just added one more. No mask, no shoes, no shirt, no service. Okay, that's the right of a private institution. If you have a corner store or a gas station or a restaurant or something like that, then you're well within your rights to insist on that. It's up to somebody like me, as an example. If they insist on that, then I have a choice to make. I either put the mask on and say, okay, fine, or I leave. That's all. Right. But that's always been the option, right? If you walked into a store with just shorts on, and the guy said, no, sorry, you gotta go put something on. I got a choice to make, right? Do I abide by that and go, maybe there's a T-shirt in the car or something like that you can throw on real quick, or do I just go someplace else? And that's always historically been your options. You have an option. The part that really was depressing through it all was when the government. Oh, really? I'm just reading a comment from Mike or from John. Sorry. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Anyway, um, where was I? What was I talking about? I lost my
Yeah.
train of thought. Move the
Anyways,
wire
like
again.
you were talking about the feeling of going into places. You know what? I went to Ottawa Senators game on Sunday, and it was weird because like walking in, I I'd forgotten that I didn't need to have a mask. And I brought somebody who was going to their first NHL game, and she said, "Do I have to wear a mask in here?" And I said, "No, no, you don't have to." And a lot of people are still thinking that they have to wear a mask like going to the games, but it was actually like a weird feeling walking into a building like that and not having to wear a mask. And it's amazing how after 2 years of having to wear a mask inside a building, how it becomes just a part of you and part of what you do. And all of a sudden, it's like you're in a different world. Now, I did experience the world of not having to wear a mask last year twice when I went to Florida. In January, I went down there, and I went back in November. And you step off the airplane and you go out into society in Florida, even back in 2021, and it was just a different world and a different mindset down there. And there are still people down there that will wear their masks, but it
Right.
was it was interesting just to step out of Canada and go down south and live in a totally different environment where you were mask free. And you talked about people being happy without the mask mandates up here. When I went down to Florida, everybody was in a good mood, and not just because it was Florida, just because I think that a lot of people were happy that they had that freedom because they were looking at other states and saying, "Wow, they're still having to go through all these mandates." So,
Yeah.
Nick, are you
Well, I'm still here. I'm right with you.
okay?
Um, it's just that I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I know that when Joseph went down to, I think he went down to Youngstown before we lifted the mandates here, and in he walked into a Cracker Barrel or some kind of restaurant down there. Nobody was wearing masks. He said it was down there for about 4 hours. It was like being freed from prison. There's when you have to put up with something like that. It's look, it's compared to some of the other problems the world has right now. It's not exactly what I would call, uh, you know, a big deal. But to people who don't live in the places where those, let's take Ukraine as an example. Okay, uh, you're not worried about wearing a mask in Ukraine. You're worried about staying alive,
Right.
and not because of some invisible virus, but because some very visible explosions and a lot of hot steel flying around. So they have a whole different set of problems to deal with. COVID, the least on the list. But over here, it's been 2 years of a lot of stress, divided families, friends that have parted company because um, they couldn't get they just couldn't come to terms with how to best deal with us. So to watch this, it's like watching excuse me, a butterfly come out of a cocoon. Maybe that's a little dramatic, but the point is that people are becoming themselves again. The
Right.
sense of fear that's underpinned the last 2 years is slowly ebbing away. And now, when people talk about masking, and maybe we might have to go back to this in the fall, a lot of people are saying, "Screw that, I'm done." And that's my attitude. But I am by no means the only one with that attitude. So um, all I can say is it's a good thing. It's wonderful to see. I love people are laughing. They're telling jokes. They're just there's a lightness to the atmosphere right now that I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, you know what's really nice is to actually see people's faces and their smiles again. Now, when I go into my local grocery store, the workers still have to wear their masks, And that's a bit of a shame because when you're going through the cash and you're maybe having a little bit of banter with the cashier and you're chatting with them, and so they can see my smile, but I can't see their smile. And there's
Right.
something about not being able to actually see that person's smile, their facial expression. It's just kind of it's a little bit of annoying, and what gets me is that the cashier in the grocery store is behind the glass anyway, so you've got the glass partition protection. So do they really need the mask to be protected from anybody? It's like you've got the glass right there, so would that not be enough?
Well, look, if you're going to be looking for common sense in this whole thing, looking back over it, you're not going to find any. I mean, people reacted far more out of fear than they did common sense. Like the idea, how many people do you see walking around with a bandana over their nose, right? Or a mask that obviously hasn't been washed. The surgical masks people wore were supposed to be daily disposed of with new ones to replace them. And I can't tell you the number of times not only did I see people driving in their cars with this thing on by themselves, and not just downtown, but on the highway. So you can't say, well, they're just going from one place to another, didn't want to bother. That may be true, but in general, um, it's just, it was just, I can't even think of the right phrase to describe it. Um, I just want to mention what Christina said. She said there's a comment
Yeah, I
in the
saw that
chat room
comment. Yeah, go
here.
ahead, read it.
She says, I think masks are here to stay. Wear one or don't, your choice. We will learn how to deal with this just like a flu or cold. Immunization as a must. Immunization is a
As an
must
extra
as an
precaution.
extra precaution. Yes, I can't read. Thank you for that, Christina. Um, Maybe you're right as far as the masks are concerned. I just, going back to the old vax argument again, uh, I just never felt that this warranted the kind of reaction that it got. I didn't think that, you know, I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch. I've got tetanus, I've got
Me
yellow
neither.
fever, I've got, a lot of different vaccines I've taken over my lifetime because they made sense. It was obvious. You don't want yellow fever, you don't want measles, you don't want polio, COVID. You know, it's not that big a deal when you look at the not the recidivism rate, but the mortality rate over the population. Some people have died from it. I don't diminish that, but a lot of them were elderly, or a lot of them had underlying health concerns, which is what we've been saying all along.
That's right. We knew
So
that even before the virus came to North America. We we saw what was happening in Europe. It was obviously from China, then it went to Europe, and it was very bad in northern Italy.
oh
And
man,
so we had a preview of what could happen in North America. But at least before it came to North America, we could see in Italy where it was affecting the older population. And
oh
apparently, from what I heard, is that in Italy, there's a lot of smoke. Smoking is quite popular, especially among the older population there. So that doesn't help your
immune
health
system.
chances when a
Yeah.
pandemic comes along.
Well, on
And then
top
it
of
turned
that, they
into
also
Spain.
have a very old up population to begin with.
That's
Their
true.
birth rate is very low. Um, there's very few aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, and nieces over there, and that played into it. But one of the most striking, speaking of Italy, one of the most striking things, there's two memories I have of the early days of COVID. One is of people standing on their balcony singing opera to each other back and forth across the aisle or across the street because they
Right.
couldn't go to the opera. So they said, fine, we'll have our own opera. And the other
Right.
one was deer actually running down city streets. And this wasn't just in Italy, this was all over the world. Wildlife began to take over the city
Is
because
that
there was
right?
nobody out. Nobody scared
Yeah.
them off. So anyway, I'm glad to see the masks are coming off, and I'm glad to see the people are relaxing. I went for breakfast yesterday, the day before, to a little diner here in Barry's Bay, and nobody wore a mask. They still have the plexiglass up, and look, I'm not going to. That's not a hill I'm going to die on. If they want to leave it, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay my bill and leave anyway. So what's the difference, right?
Yeah.
But just this, you're right, because we're such social creatures. When we look at somebody, and you say something, you expect some kind of facial reaction, whether
Right.
it's good or bad. You know, you hit somebody in the head of the side of the head with a 2i4, they're going to frown at you at least if they don't return the favor. So there's, uh, yeah, Craig, it might be. Craig says it started in Italy. It actually started in China, but the first European country to get it
Yeah, the first
probably
European
was
country is
Italy.
Italy,
Yeah, because
and
they're pretty close to China, geographically speaking, compared to us.
yeah,
But
and
anyway,
it hit Spain really badly. And the one
same
memory I
story
have
though.
of that, I was I don't know if you're on Hotmail. Like when I am on Hotmail, like if I log out, it takes me to the MSN page, and
Right,
you always see these little thumbnail stories of things happening around the world.
right.
So at the end, I guess it was the spring of 2020. I'm on the MSN page just looking at stories from around the world, and I see a little thumbnail, and I see a small picture of somebody who looks like somebody that I know. So I thought, hey, that looks like my friend Stephanie. And then I clicked on the story, and it was my friend Stephanie. And it happened that she was actually in Spain just as the pandemic was hitting Spain really hard. So, and the Canadian government was telling people, if you're in Spain, anywhere in Europe, get home to Canada as soon as you can. So I think that she posted something on Twitter or whatever and said, "I'm stuck on in Italy, but I'm trying to get a flight home." And then I looked and I said, "Oh wow, I don't actually know this person." So when I spoke to her later on, I said, "How did you get on that CBC website in the first place?" She says, "Oh, I just put it on Twitter, and then CBC saw it, and then they
And picked
contacted
it
me
up.
and they said, 'Can we do a little interview with you?'" And she said, "Sure." So my friend had her 15 minutes of fame because she happened to be stuck in Spain at the time. Now she was able to get back to Canada. She got an early flight, so she had to leave like about 5 or 6 days earlier than she wanted to, but she was happy to come back to Canada. But
Hmm.
I thought it was interesting that I see this international story on MSN,
Well,
and it's a friend of mine.
I have somebody who's a friend of mine on Facebook, and she was in England visiting a friend of hers right at the time this whole thing broke, and she was there for almost a year before she could get back. Now,
Wow.
she went over for a few weeks. So think about this: you're over there, and all of a sudden you can't leave. What are you going to do for money? What are you going
Yeah.
to do? Where are you going to live? I mean, if you stay in a hotel, now she was lucky; she had a friend of hers she was staying with,
Right.
so she was able to, couch surf for a year almost, and then you know, I don't know. I never did ask about finances. How did they manage that? I'm sure that they probably pitched in together to get through this because the her friend couldn't go anywhere either. Everything was shut down. So unless you're going to the grocery store, straight there, straight back kind of mentality, it was a it really was a dark time from that
It was.
perspective. So um, I'm just curious. I'm just delighted. I'm just delighted that these people. And another comment: I have worn a mask. Haven't worn a mask anywhere since the mandate lifted, and I'm in the minority. I'm not bothered with it, and I haven't been ostracized about it either. And I share. I'm in the same boat, Craig. Same story. I don't wear one unless, and since the mandate's been lifted, nobody has asked me to put a mask on. Nobody.
Right.
And people walking around me with masks on, I never look at them and say, "Hey, you're being kind of silly. Take the mask off." Because
It's
they're the
their choice.
ones. It's their choice exactly. If I don't agree with it, that who cares? They have to live their lives. So if that's what they feel want to do to feel comfortable, all right, fine. It's not bothering me.
I was surprised because the mask mandate was lifted, I believe it was March 21st, which was a few Mondays ago. So that Monday, I was in the house puttering around and I decided to go to the library. And I was like the only person in the library that didn't have a mask on. And I was kind of shocked. I thought it might be 50-50 or even, 70% without masks, but the majority of people had masks on. And then I went across the street to my Metro grocery store, and it was basically the same thing. Like the majority of people in the grocery store had masks on. So I guess the thinking was, as long as we're in an indoor space, like I still want to protect myself and protect others, and that was the mindset. But I was surprised because my prediction had been that more than half the people would say, "Okay, I'm not wearing the mask if the province says you don't have to." So I was a bit surprised by that.
Well, you know something, and I got to be careful the way I phrase this, but when there's certain people who will use the library, and I'm not being disparaging, but the kind of people who go to a library are, I think, are the kind of people who will, listen to the government and follow. It's just the mindset. It's like when you see somebody wearing Birkenstocks and having a latte, you have a certain preconceived idea. Maybe it's completely wrong, and I'm conscious of that. I'd never say, "Oh, there goes another lefty hippie." How do I know? Until you actually have a
Yeah,
conversation. But I don't think I'm too far off the mark to say that when people go to a library, there's certain kinds of people who do. Like, if you got a redneck out here in Killaloo, they're not going to the library. They're out in the field fixing whatever's broke, or they're in the bush cutting trees. They don't go to libraries and they don't care about math. So
yeah,
I'm just kind of extrapolating that from what you said, and and I admit I could be completely wrong. Maybe I'm completely misreading it, but that's my gut sense of it anyway.
yeah. I never really thought of it that way. I don't know if there's any correlation between the person that goes to the library and how they lean politically or
And I'm not
otherwise. But
knocking going to the library either. I love libraries.
I love libraries. I like to go there and just read a couple newspapers and browse around, see if there's any CDs, books on CD that I can borrow. So
Yep.
the library is right close to me, and you know what? I'm one of those people that feels like my taxes are going to pay for that library service, so I
You
might as
might
well
as well
use
use it.
my taxes. And sometimes I'll go on the computer and listen to some music or.
It's funny we're talking about libraries because just over here, knock my lamp over, just over here, I have a very small library. All kinds of
Okay,
history, all kinds of political books. I've got The Life of Arthur Conan Doyle on the shelf. There's a little bit of Shakespeare, a couple of Churchill. And over here, there's another bookshelf with more stuff. I like, I don't know how we ended up on this, but I like the tactile feel of holding a book in your hands and reading it. I don't do
yeah,
it nearly as much as I used to for the sake of convenience. If I'm reading, usually it's something online because that's where the most current, and we talk about current affairs. So that's where you do most of your reading is in that genre. But when I want to dig into military history, or if I want to learn about a person like Albert Einstein, I have his biography over there on the shelf. One of these days, I'll actually get to it and read it because he's a fascinating
yeah,
individual. I've got one on Marco Polo over there. So all kinds of different books if that's what you want. My wife grumbles at me every time she has to dust them, but I won't throw them out because I love those books. So I'm not all that to say I'm not disparaging people who want to go to the library. I'm just saying I think there's a trend or a certain kind of people that are more likely to go to a library uh, and have that kind of an attitude that we have to do everything we can to keep ourselves safe. And
yeah. So getting back to the mask thing, now
yeah,
there are still places where you have to wear the mask in most Canadian cities. I don't know about most Canadian cities, but I know in Ottawa you still have to wear a mask on transit. And that at first I didn't like that idea when it first came out back in 2020, but I've slightly changed my mind because I was a person that was using public transit every day to get to work. And even before the pandemic, one of the things that used to really bother me is I'd be sitting on the bus and the guy behind me had a bad cold and he's coughing and coughing and coughing. And it would just drive me crazy. Now that's the kind of person I wish they had a mask on. So I can understand now in public transit where you might be, uh, our public transit is not as crowded as it was now in Ottawa because of people working from home. But back in
right.
the days when you were jam packed like sardines on some of the buses and the trains, that's the those are the days when I think, you know what, we should all be wearing masks here just to protect each other. And I wouldn't have minded it back then.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what this public transit thing you speak of is. I'm kidding. But I just I just don't like. I've never liked public transit. I'd only take it once a year,
Yeah.
and that was when I was still on terrestrial radio in Ottawa. I would take it downtown because it was free, and there was no parking to be had downtown anyway. So I'd
Right.
step on board, go down to the station, go to Parliament Hill, do a broadcast from there, whatever. When it came time to leave, I'd get back on the bus and go back to the burbs with my car away. And
Yeah.
but other than that,
Craig just had a
I'm
Craig just
go
had a
ahead.
comment that said, "Get up and move." And that's sometimes that's hard to do because if you're near like the back of the bus and you're on the inside seat and then there's a person behind you, and it's like
You're
if
not
there's nowhere
gaining
else to go,
anything.
it's like sometimes you're wedged in, you're stuck there.
I will tell you that I spent 36 hours on a bus recently when I came back down from Sioux Lookout back here to Chillaloo.
Right.
And I'll tell you, oh, did I miss my car? And I met some really nice people on the bus. I did. There was an Amish couple going down to Barrie. They were all on board, and because their method of transportation would take them way too long to get to Barrie. But they had family down there they wanted to go see, and that's look great. It was a wonderful They had the cutest little 3-year-old girl I've ever seen in my life, and I gave her one of my little snack bars, and you should have seen the look on her face. She was grinning ear to ear, and she didn't just fork it down. She nibbled it, and she spent about an hour eating it. And
Right.
her parents are great, and it was just wonderful. So there's those experiences you can't get in a private car. But what I'm
True.
always afraid of is ending up being stuck sitting next to Stinky Pete, the guy that hasn't had a shower for a month and doesn't know what soap is. You know, because once you, oh man, I've done that too, and that's no fun. And
That
I don't
kind of
like
happened
being.
to me
Go ahead.
a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago. I was taking a bus down to Montreal to visit a friend, and I guess I could have driven my car, but it was in the winter time, and I don't like to drive a long distance in the winter in my car just in case.
Right.
And I was sitting beside a guy who I can't remember. He was, yeah, he had a kind of like a kind of a funky scent to him. And not only that, but he's one of those guys that was like all spread out. It's got to take up all this room. And he
Yeah.
had his
I,
arm on my armrest. And no, no, it was his leg. He had his leg way over to the side, like touching my leg. And it's just like, I had to politely say, "Sir, could you just give me some room here?" And he did. But it's just like, really? It's like, can you just take up a little less space, buddy?
yeah. Well, those seats on a bus aren't that great. I did get the back three seats in the last leg of the journey, but they've actually put seat belts in. You don't have to wear them, but they're there. And
Right.
when I'm laying on the back seats trying to get some sleep, good luck. The belt buckle is jabbing into my kidney. So look, I know this is a first world problem. Well, let's
First
face it,
world
it
problem.
is, and I know it.
Yeah. It's funny, we're
Yeah,
coming around. We were talking about masks, now we're talking about buses, and we when I have a little bit of nostalgia whenever I go downtown Ottawa and I see the old Voyageur bus station, which is now vacated, and there's no more Voyageur buses. So there's a couple of outfits now that are starting up to fill that void, which I think is great. And
right.
uh, 'cause not everybody has a car, and not everybody can afford to fly down to Montreal or Toronto. So I'm glad to see that there are some entrepreneurs out there who are giving us bus service once again. And the last time I took the bus down to Montreal, like I was actually really impressed. Like the coaches were really comfortable. Like the
Yeah,
seats were
these.
like very wide and very
Yep.
comfortable. I enjoyed the bus ride down to Montreal.
There was a good stretch of the leg, and I know we're way down a rabbit hole here. We had no intention of going down, but that's what live radio does. But one of the things I did to help pass time was I sat in the front seat right behind the driver off to his right across the aisle. And because I was a truck driver for a long time, driving a bus and driving a truck, there's some differences, no doubt, but there's a lot of similarities too. So we chatted for probably 2 hours just passing time. And part of my logic was I want to keep guy's mind alert because there was snow and it was not the best driving conditions, but he was a consummate professional, was very, very good behind the wheel. And we had a great conversation. It's just I don't
Yeah,
like being held to somebody else's schedule, is what it really comes down to. I
yeah,
want my independence. I want to be able to go when I want to go and come back when I want to come back. And I don't want to be standing out at a bus stop with, minus 40 in the wind whipping around my ears. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, well, I kind of I'm more used to public transit, I guess, than you are because I was taking it every single day to work, so it became just a regular part of my life. And even on a in a few weeks from now, when I head down to the States, I'm looking forward to the trip down. And as long as the person sitting beside me on the plane is nice and polite and well mannered, that's all I care about. So
Yep. Well, most
looking
people
forward
are,
to that.
and some people
Pardon me.
find there's a lot of stress in traveling great distances, whether it's flying or taking the train or the bus, and they don't necessarily deal with it very well. And sometimes you don't see the best the person has to offer. All right, with that, we're going to take a little break. And when we get back, we'll have more enchanting and exciting conversation with my guest host, uh, Chris Fraser, right after this on the Nick and Joe Show. Okay, welcome back to the Nick and Joe show, folks. I'm Nick and he's not Joe.
I'm not Joe, I am Chris.
That is true. Chris Fraser is subbing in for Joe while Joe is doing politics. So I want to thank you again for joining the team for however long it lasts. It's a pleasure to have you on board. We
Great to
were
be here.
talking about the euphoria, or at least the lifting of the mandates, and how people's spirits have seemed to have been buoyed by that, and how wonderful it is to see that now. So I guess what we want to move on to, once, because I think we milked that cow pretty dry.
I think so.
Uh, there's I'm I'll let you pick the next topic. That's what I'll do.
Okay, we were talking a while before the show about things to talk about, and I know you wanted to talk about the Ontario government's Bill C-67, the Racial Equity Bill.
Yes, that's what
And
they call it.
yeah, so Nick, I have an article here. I'm not going to read the whole article because people don't need to be read to, but there is a fair bit of reading here. And maybe I'll read a little bit and then throw it back to you.
Yeah,
So
give us a
it's that
paragraph
time.
or two.
Yeah, and there's a gentleman named Ross McKittrick. He's a professor of economics at the University of Guelph, a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. And he sent a letter to the Ontario government on March 29th, and True North has published the letter. So I'll just give you the first paragraph and then you'll jump in here. But just so our listeners can know what we're talking about, Bill C-67, the Racial Equity in the Education System Act 2022, has passed second reading in the Ontario legislature and is now under review by the Standing Committee on Social Policy. Bill C-67 seeks to amend various acts with respect to racial equity, including Ontario's Education Act, the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities Act, and the Ontario College of Teachers Act. The bill would, among other measures, mandate anti-racism and racial equity training for teachers, as well as fines for persons who disrupt or attempt to disrupt proceedings of a school or class through the use of racist language or activities. Just give me one more paragraph here, and then I'll let you
Sure.
throw it back to you. So he says, Dear Ontario MPPs, I write to express my deep opposition to Ontario Bill 67, the Education Sector Anti-Racism Bill. The problem is not the intent to teach about the complex history of race relations and cultivate non-racist attitudes. We want that in our schools. The problem is that the legislation privileges and mandates adherence to one side of a very complex and divisive battle over how to accomplish that goal. The Act creates an institutional structure that will suppress the very debates and discussions it seeks to encourage. So I'm going to stop there for a second. I'll read a bit more later, but I'll throw it to you, Nick, and you can tell me why this subject is
Got me
something
all
you
hot and
want to
bothered.
discuss.
Well, I got to tell you, Chris, the thing that gets my furnace going over this is the same program that we're seeing in the United States. Critical race theory is what this is. And critical race theory, in general, if I can put it into a nutshell, says that anything that comes along that has anything to do with, like, if you're a white Anglo-Saxon male and you have British roots, you are racist to begin with, and so are the institutions that get put in place, and that has to change. This is it's just absolutely ridiculous. Now, the bill itself pretends to protect traditional media. Well, let me deal with that first. First of all, why should traditional media be protected? In other words, print newspapers and radio stations as we knew them in the past and so on. What about them makes them so unique that they're immune to technological advance? What we're doing now is where the future of radio and news and things like that is. So to say that they have to protect that media means they have to be able to, they want to be able to control the content. And that's what is at the bottom of this. Not only is it bad for how did it wait a minute? I think I'm jumping topics here.
I think you're sliding into a different topic. I think I
I
heard more
think
like the
so. I
free
just
speech
realized,
topic.
wait a minute, this has got nothing to do with critical race theory.
There
Sorry,
you go.
critical race theory. Let me come back, come back up out of that rabbit hole. That's a different hole. We'll go down
you,
that in a minute.
you had me
But
worried there for a second, Nick. So
I'm
good.
thinking, wait a minute, I'm not making any sense, which is not all that uncommon. But the bottom line is, with critical race theory, they're undermining one. They're saying that everybody who is white and is of Anglo-Saxon heritage is in effect racist, and so are the institutions that they put in place. This is absolute poppycock. Because first of all, Chris, you and I look. I can't speak for anybody else, but the last thing I worry about is what somebody looks like, or where they come from, or even what they believe in, because I'm comfortable in my own skin. I know what I believe, I know where I come from. And if somebody comes from a different part of the planet with a different set of belief systems, that's okay by me. We can have a conversation. Like, you come from Jamaica, I believe, right?
My parents
Is
do.
that
I
where
was born here.
your parents do? Okay, so that,
Yeah.
let's call it your heritage is Jamaican.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, mine's Dutch and French. Okay, I don't know how you get more diametrically opposed in backgrounds than that. But
Right.
the point is that never enters into our conversations. It's never an issue with us because neither one of us care about it.
Right.
Not on a personal level. Like, I don't look at somebody and say, "Well, you look this way, therefore I have to have this opinion about you," or "I'm not going to talk to you at all." That's just the only thing we really care about. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but at least for me, I believe in merit. I really
Right.
strongly believe in what Martin Luther King said. I don't want to be judged. I don't want my children to be judged by the color of their skin. I want them to be judged by the content of their character. Now, that's probably a paraphrase. I don't know if I got it exactly right, but that's the
That's
sentiment.
close enough. Yeah.
And yeah, and I just think that's the best benchmark you can use. Uh, because, first of all, you lay everything else aside. Look at it this way: if you're laying on the table and you need triple bypass surgery, and somebody who walks in doesn't look like you, doesn't sound like you, doesn't act like you, doesn't believe the same things you believe, but they're the very best surgeon on the planet, are you going to tell them no?
Yeah.
No, of course not. Hey,
Of course
doc,
not.
knock your socks off. If you're the best, that's all I care about.
Exactly. And growing up in Canada, I felt very. First of all, they in the CRT, and I haven't gone through CRT training because I'm not a kid in school, but from what I hear from people, they use terms like white privilege. Well,
Yeah,
I grew up in a middle class home. Like when we first moved to Ottawa, we were living in Sandy Hill. It was like a maybe a little lower middle class neighborhood at the time, and then in the matter of a few years, we moved up to a upper middle class neighborhood. So I actually had privilege. I was brought up in a upper middle class neighborhood. Went to a good school, had lots of friends. I felt that my teachers treated me fairly. The marks I got, I deserved, and I never felt that I was underprivileged because of my skin color growing up in Ottawa. So that's why it kind of bothers me when I hear people talk about white privilege. It's like, well, if you had two loving, caring parents like myself who gave you all the things that you needed and made sure that you were had all the things, the necessities of life, that's a privilege in itself. That I was very privileged to grow up in a stable family. That's the most important privilege that you need in life.
the privilege is to live here.
Yeah,
It's not what you look like. It's a privilege to be part of the Canadian mosaic. There always contrast between the American melting pot and the Canadian mosaic. I there are times I wish it was more of a melting pot because I think that creates a stronger country when everybody rallies, and identifies first in Canada, it would be great if people would identify first as a Canadian who happens to come from this part of the world and brought some of the best parts of the culture that they were part of with them. Well, I'm talking about immigrants now. In the United States, okay, they expect you to blend right in and you adopt their attitudes and adopt their lifestyles and all that stuff. And I don't see either one as bad. It's just we're different that way.
Different.
But when this critical race theory, first of all, what white privilege are we talking about? What privilege do I have that you don't? I mean, I'm very much lower middle class from an economic point of view. Yeah, I've got a farm. I own some land, but you could very easily do the same thing. There's no block to you, other than maybe finances, especially right now. I mean, anybody, and that doesn't matter who you are,
Right.
buying property right now is extremely expensive. So I understand that. But generally speaking, when you look at the world as a whole and you look at Canada as a whole, the attitude is if you can't make it here, you can't make it anywhere. You've
Yeah.
got more opportunities. You've got more, uh, I don't want to say benefits, but you got, I guess the best word for it is opportunities to succeed or fail based on your own strengths. Now, the government gets in the way of that all the time, and they're trying their very best to make that harder and harder every day. And by and large, they're succeeding. So
Yeah,
this is
and
why,
that's not this. None of this is to say that there isn't racism in society. Of course, there's racism
of
everywhere you
course,
go. Yeah, but
right,
are you going to take like 0.005% of the population who might be racist and say you know that's a big problem? I mean, we there's lots of problems in society. People cheat, people steal, people do all kinds of things. You're never
that's
going
right.
to eliminate bad behavior or evil altogether. But for the small percentage of people who may have racist views, like, is that really worth worrying about? I
You've
don't.
got
If you
the whole population, but
ask any of your friends if they actually know anybody who is a real out and out racist, and you probably can't think of anybody that that's actually racist.
so, in other words, what you're saying is we don't want to throw the whole population under the bus for the sake of the few, one or two bad apples in the barrel.
Yeah, and when I look at the way the world has changed, when my sister and I went to school here in Ottawa as kids, we were like the only visible minorities in our school, maybe one or two others. Like talking at a big school, like a public school like Hopewell Avenue, pretty big public school, and there was maybe like four or five of us. And then I
Yeah,
went to Glebe High School, and once again there were maybe just a handful of us visible minorities. And now you go to those schools today, and it's like, wow, it's like 30-40% of the population are visible minorities. So what does
right.
that say about a country that has said, come on over to our country, to the point where 40 or 50% of some of the schools are now visible minorities? That says to me that this country is pretty welcoming to people of all kinds of backgrounds and skin colors and ethnicities.
Well, it's interesting. As I listen to you say that, I think back on my own experiences as a child when I was growing up. I grew up in southern Ontario, just north of Leamington, where the big red tomato is, and Heinz had a plant for years. Tomato capital of Canada by a long shot. Other than people who were Italian, um, I didn't know anybody who didn't look like me. I mean, it
Right.
was just, and it never occurred to me that there would be a problem if somebody didn't. The first time I encountered somebody who didn't look like me was a guy that I sailed with called Tony. Now, I won't mention his last name because I don't have permission to, but Tony was one of the best engineers I ever sailed with. He was smart. He was a black guy, but he was absolutely brilliant. And I really looked up to him because he was so good at what he did, to the
Right.
point where I went to him one day and I said, do I, do I bother you sometimes? Like, because he'd get frustrated. I'd say something really stupid and he'd get frustrated. And he says, no, you just got some growing up to do. He was
Ah,
way more mature. We were about the same age, but he was way more mature than I was. And I
ah,
learned a ton from that guy. And he's still on Facebook. I still correspond with him once in a while. And he's a
right.
great guy. And that was the first encounter I ever had. The first person who was, let's say, Jewish that I got to know was Joseph. I invited him on the show one night. Now, I don't
Right.
have anything against people who are Jewish by any stretch, but Joseph he's a very, very bright man, and I just love the way his mind works, and it's a lot of fun to watch as he works through a problem. And just so, in other words, what somebody looks like is so irrelevant and so not part of the equation, and not just for me, but for millions of Canadians. They just don't care. So we come back to this critical race theory that the government. So what's this all about? Why are they trying to force this down our necks? Why are they imposing this on our children? It's not, we do not have, there is racism, you're right. And sometimes it can be pretty pronounced amongst, let's say, the Aboriginal communities and so on, the way they've been treated in the past. I don't deny that. But by comparison to other countries, we do not have a racial problem in this country.
Yeah. Let me just read another paragraph here from that article
Sure.
I was looking at. It says Bill 67 does something different. It embeds into our education system anti-racism, which is a euphemism for a new and controversial school of thought, thought associated with critical race theory, CRT. Enshrining it in law imposes its dominance in the curriculum and governance of our schools before people have had the chance to properly assess it. Many US states have had experience with CRTC in the education system over the past few years and are now struggling with the resulting acrimony because of its divisive, accusatory, and demoralizing content. And if you follow US politics the way I do, and I really recommend people in Canada spend a little bit of time following what's happening in the United States, because you really want to, because whatever happens down there ends up coming up here. And in the state of Virginia, I can't remember if it's which north or south,
Are
but
you
anyways,
talking about the recall?
not that's California, but in Virginia they had a governor's race
Yeah, that's
5 or
right.
6 months ago,
Yeah.
and one of the key uh, factors in that race was CRT.
Yep.
And the Virginia was a Democrat state. The Democrats did won it in the presidential race
Right.
last year, but in
It
the
went blue.
governor's race, it went to the Republicans. And a lot of it was because of the CRTC. A lot of parents were really upset because of, their kids would come home, I guess, and tell them, hey, mom and dad, what'd you learn in school today? Well, I learned that I have special privilege because I'm white, and the black kids don't have privilege, and we were probably slave owners 100 years ago, and blah blah blah. And parents started to hear this stuff, and they said, hey, we don't want our kids being taught this. So it actually affected the governor's race in Virginia, and it turned the tide for the Republicans, and now it's spreading to other states. And but
Yeah,
like,
they're not the only ones to deal with this. California, most famously, by recalling and firing 3 school board trustees because of this policy. I had a little laugh. You keep saying CRTC. It's CRT.
did I say
Yeah,
CFTC?
yeah. No, this is not the Canadian Radio Transmission CRTC, the Canadian
Radio
Radio
Television Commission, yeah.
Telecommunications Commission. That's it.
But they'll
I
they'll
knew.
have a they'll have a say in it, I'm sure.
I'm sure they will. They can't keep quiet about anything. Anyway, the but you're right, and it was. I thought this was a uniquely American problem until I heard about this bill, and I thought this is crazy. Canada is not by its nature a racist country. There's a few people out there who think they have something to gain by pushing this agenda, and it's not good for the province, it's not good for the country, and it's certainly not good for our kids. And that, I think, needs to be shot down, trampled into the mud, pounded into the ground, have a stake driven through its heart, throw holy water on it, and bury it so it never comes back again. Because this is just, Chris, sometimes I think that maybe you and I are the only two sane people left on the planet. I really
Oh,
do, because I look around and thinking either I'm taking stupid pills, which you could make an argument for, or everybody else is nuts.
But you know what? There's a lot of sane people out there, but they're also quiet too. And the thing is, people they don't want to rock the boat. And this thing, the article says it's gone through second reading, and a lot of the politicians who are voting for this, they don't understand what they're voting for because I guess they get so many bills thrown in front of them. They said, "Oh well, anti-racism, it sounds good, so yeah, I'll
Yeah,
vote for him."
exactly.
But
This is
until
virtue
you're,
signaling. That's exactly what this is.
yeah,
I just want to mention Chris says I've had all races work for me from time to time. They would come and tell me how someone made them feel bad for not being white. Every time I told them they should never feel like a minority, they should only feel and act as an equal to anyone they served. And he's exactly right.
yeah,
The
and
only
that's how I.
time that yeah,
No,
the
go ahead,
guy
go ahead.
who I was just going to say the only time you wouldn't feel equal, and not in a person to person on a personal level, when you have an employer who's writing the check for the employee. Okay, the employer, okay, you're not on his footing because you don't take the risks he does, but that's a
Right,
completely different scenario than what Chris is talking about.
yeah. And that's not to say I haven't seen incidences of things even in the workplace, myself over the past years, but nothing to send me home crying. I remember one time I was just wandering around the office one day, and one of the director generals was standing around, and this is a gentleman who, a typical, I don't know who would you, I wouldn't even say an Archie Bunker type, but he was quite a character,
We're
and I'm
dating
standing around.
ourselves.
He had his blue um, recycle bin in his hand or something for some reason. I just happened to come across him, and he looked at me and he said to me, "Do you want to empty this for me?" And it was like the weirdest thing. It's like, why is he asking me this for? I don't even work for this guy, and he just said that. And I said to myself, I said, "No, I don't think so." But afterwards, I thought to myself, why did he say that? Was he saying that? Was this like a racial thing? Was he thinking that, this guy should empty my
Hey boy,
basket?
get over here and do this.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what? I just said no, thank you, and I walked away. But I thought nothing of it afterwards. I thought, I don't know what was going on in that guy's mind, but whatever it was, it's like,
It's
you
not
you
worth
keep
the
your
effort
thoughts to
to think
yourself.
about it. Oh my
But
God.
I mean, if he was a racist or whatever, it's like, you know what? That's his problem, not mine. I don't work for the guy, but I just politely said no and walked away.
I had an
But it
experience.
was
It
it
had
was an
nothing to do
odd
with race.
thing.
I had nothing. This had nothing to do with the race, but I had an experience like that while I was in the Navy. Uh, there's this petty officer. We were in the engineer's workshop, and he came to me. uh, uh, Christine is making a great point. Archie Bunker, how that show was able to air back then, sure would not see that show now. Classic, absolutely. Couldn't agree
We
with you more.
watched
It's a
as
great
a family.
show.
We watched that show every night as a family, every Saturday night.
Oh, you know what? It was people could take a joke. They could
Yeah,
laugh at each other and it was okay.
but it
Nobody
was
had to get
education.
counseling or that time
Yeah.
out or, go into the pink room. But to get back to my story, this petty officer looked at me and he said, Vandergrat, I want you to go down into nine mess, which is where the chief and petty officers slept. And I want you to strip all the racks and make all the bunks. And he turned and he stepped out back into the flats. I'm thinking, okay, he's gone. So I turned to my buddy beside me and I said, who the hell does he think he is? I'm not making his rack. Are you crazy? What I didn't know was he had stepped back in and heard every word I said.
Ah,
So not the same kind of story you're telling, but they brought that memory back.
yeah.
Anyway, looking at the clock, it's time for us to take our top of the hour break, refresh your beverages, and we will see you all again in a few minutes. And the mean, we'll be back with the Nick and Joe show right after this with more. Oh, I guess we're back. There's Chris.
Here I
All
am.
right. Welcome back to the second half of the Nick and Joe show, folks. Chris Fraser is my guest host. Pleasure to have him on board. And we were talking about critical race theory that the Ontario government wants to place in schools. Now, you know what I find really, just to kind of wrap this topic up, Chris, what I find amazing, this is supposed to be a Tory government, a conservative government, one that believes in there's certain principles you're supposed to believe to call yourself a Tory, like smaller government, lower taxes, you know, more independence and more personal freedom and responsibility. None of this fits that category.
Yeah, and it's certainly nothing that was ever brought up in the last provincial election, and nobody even saw this coming. Probably because nobody even saw this as an issue or a problem 2 or 3 years ago. So if it wasn't a problem then, or an issue
Why
then,
is it a
why is
problem
it
now?
an issue now? it makes no
Excuse me
sense to me
while I hack up
why.
a lung here.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
it's
they
just
just
amazing how it's like a solution looking for a problem or something. We
yeah.
don't need this.
You know that old saying, "He's a rebel without a cause."
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
this is a problem without. This is a solution without a problem.
yeah, and
That's what this is.
it's just
Because we don't.
I worry about what they're going to be presenting to the kids, and like leave kids alone. I know like in a few minutes we'll be talking about the that Florida bill because I think we wanted to talk about the parental rights bill in Florida, but it kind of
Yeah.
transitions like nicely into that because whatever happened to we're going to sound like some old fogies now, Nick, but whatever happened to the days when you went to school and your parents sent you off to school knowing that you were going to learn in the primary grades how to write, to read, do arithmetic, learn some geography, learn about the world around you, learn some history about how we came to be as a society, and a little phys ed to keep you physically fit, and then you came home, and that was it. What has changed in the world that all of a sudden now we have to do all this social engineering? It's
Well,
scary.
I true, and then sometimes technological advances force that on you. Like now, computer sciences are a big thing. Never was. I remember in high school was when I saw my first computer, and it had a tape drive, like a cassette tape drive. And we used to
Right.
play a game called Dungeons and Dragons on it. And
Yeah.
you get one line of script, it would pop up, say, you're standing in a hallway and you come to a door. Do you want to go through or do you want to turn around? And you'd make the choice, yes or no. And that it was a little computer screen this big. You just, that and a great big monster of a machine. And we were just blown away by it. We around it for years. So, in other words, technology eventually got rolling in the computer sciences world, and now you've got kids in grade school who know far more about computers than I do. My son, who's now in his mid 30s, taught himself to write programming, and he now works for a major program software company writing and designing programming, and
Wow.
it's
Pretty
all
impressive.
self-taught. He learned it himself. You know where he got it? It's funny. I'm bragging about my son here, but trust me,
Go ahead.
he deserves it. He designed a machine that can sort Lego by its color, shape, and size and put it in the right bin.
Really?
And he would
Wow.
write lines and lines and lines of code to do that. And when he presented that to the company he now works for, they were blown away.
Hmm.
So he's a lot smarter than his old man in a lot of ways. His father may have some wisdom on him, but he's got more brain power than I think three of me would have. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons that education is different. But at its core, I think that the requirement of education is still the fundamentals. If I were running in politics today, my slogan would be getting back to basics, and that includes in education. If you can't read, if you can't write, if you can't do basic math, nothing else matters. Really, they like think about it. When you first heard the word climate change or global warming, you had to
Yeah.
when they told you what it was. People of our generation would look at it and go, "This is nonsense. This stuff is plant food. It's not poison. It's not it." And yet today, they never even present that idea to children, and children grow up thinking we're all going to die. We're all going to. Prince Philip's out there saying you got 10 years left. I think we're down to 8 now.
Yeah.
No wonder kids are a lot of kids have mental issues because they think they're all going to die in about 8 years.
It's true.
Nobody.
That's no joke. There are kids who are really having anxiety over the fate of the planet, and
Yeah,
that is like terrible.
Thunberg is angry for a reason. She just doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
She thinks she does, but what she's really angry is over being scared out of her mind and finding a way to outlet that so she can. I'm no psychologist. I'm just based on what I saw. She's a very angry young girl, and has no business lecturing anybody about anything. She should still be in high school. I think she's what, 17 or 18 now,
Yeah,
and maybe just graduating high school. But look, as Jordan Peterson famously says, 10 years ago you were 8. You don't know nothing.
yeah.
And I think that's absolutely right. Just
And
because you have
it's not as if she's like it was a child prodigy who, studied climate science and was, better than people twice her age. Like she doesn't have a not that you have to have a degree to be a smart person, but she has no education, no knowledge that's better than anybody else out there in the field. So why
well,
are you listening to a 15-year-old kid lecture you? I don't
why
understand
are we
this.
listening to some 80-year-old man who studied the genetics of fruit flies? Why are we listening to a former has-been wannabe president of the United States, vice president? Why are we listening to a lot of people? Just because they have a platform doesn't make them any smarter than you and I are. Look at
Hmm.
Damien, what's his name? Not Christian Bale. DiCaprio went to Alberta and he
Yeah,
said, I feel global. No, it's a Chinook, you idiot, that comes along every year. You know,
yeah,
just because he's an actor doesn't make him any smarter. It's just he's good at memorizing lines and putting emotion into reciting them. That's what he's good at. That's it. He's no better or worse than you and I are. He just happens to make a lot of money doing that. And if I
yeah,
could figure out a way to make that kind of money doing that, I'd do it too. However,
yeah,
so getting back to education, um, it's been supplanted by a lot of, and I don't necessarily fault the teachers so much, the people who are in the classrooms now, because they came through. Let's face it, I'm 60 years old, and people who've been teaching for 30 years, you know, I was 20, 30, yeah, 20, 30, 30 years old when they went into college.
right.
So I already had my education, and they were born, you know, the point I'm making is they entered into a tainted system to begin with. And now, though, when they walk out, they don't realize they're tainted. They think this is the way the world works. They have no historical evidence to draw on. They have no sense of what came before them. They think that this is a brand new problem that we have to solve it or we're all going to fry. And they pass that attitude on to their children, on to the kids that they teach. I
Yeah,
almost said children. They're not their children. They're our children.
yeah.
They are
That's a good
not
point.
parents.
It's
But anyway,
funny that you say that because I was watching some videos. One of my favorite podcasters, and when people say if people say you guys don't know what you're talking about, one of my favorite podcasters, Matt Walsh, he actually gets videos of teachers who have posted stuff on Facebook or TikTok, whatever, and they openly talk about what they say these are my kids, and 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 this we were going to talk about the Florida parental rights
well,
bill.
it's a great way to get into it.
Yeah, and Matt Walsh will actually play videos of teachers saying, "These are my kids, and this is what I want to teach my kids." And he's like, "Excuse me, no, they were our kids, not your kids." But that's the attitude. Like these kids, we own them now. So as a teacher, I get to teach them whatever I want to teach.
You know,
But the
this sounds just like the workers taking over a factory because they're the ones doing the work, never minding the risk that the owner of the factory took to put the place up in the first place, and then go out and hire people to do a specific job who agreed to a salary, or an hourly wage to do that work. This is right out of Karl Marx, is what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah. But so this Florida parental rights bill, the bill is called the Florida Parental Rights Bill, initiated by the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. So it says the bill establishes the Parents' Bill of Rights. The bill provides that the state, its political subdivisions, and other government entities or other institutions may not infringe upon the fundamental rights of a parent to direct the upbringing, education, healthcare, and mental health of a minor child. And so part of the bill is they say from grades kindergarten up to grade 3, they do not want part of the bill is they don't want teachers discussing things like transgenderism with their
Mhm.
students up until grade 3. which is kind of alarming because it's like, wait a second, what about from grade 4 to 8? Is it okay then? But,
Why would they? You know what bothers me? Why they would discuss it at all.
at all, yeah. So now, and just to show you how misleading the uh, the progressives can be, everyone's calling this the "Don't Say Gay" bill. The bill does not say that you can't say gay in the
Not
schools.
in the bill.
What they don't want, and what teachers are doing, are they don't want teachers in grade 3 or grade 2 going up to their kids and saying, oh yes, I am in a gay relationship or I have a same-sex partner. It's like, no, just teach the kids how to read and write. Leave your personal life out of it. That kind of stuff comes much later in life. And why that's a problem, I don't understand. As Matt Walsh says, when I went to school, I was there chatting with my friends, and I had no idea what my teacher's marital status was, and I didn't care. All I cared about was, what work I have to do, what homework I have to do, and playing with my friends at recess or whatever. So kids in primary school shouldn't be delving into their teachers' private lives, straight,
Heck,
gay, transgender,
even in the
whatever.
high school,
It
even in
shouldn't
the
even
high school,
matter. Yeah.
my music teacher started out as Miss Philsinger, and married the guidance counselor, and became Mrs. Owens. And that's all we knew about her private life,
Hmm.
and we didn't. Nobody ever asked it because we weren't there for that. As you
Right.
pointed out, we were there just how good she was an amazing teacher. What the foolishness she put up with us was just mind blowing. And I could tell you stories that if you had hair would curl it.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, anyway, the point is that they didn't go down that road.
No.
They didn't, they were there. They had a job to do, and they did it to the best. I had some great teachers in high school. It's the only reason I got through high school at all. Uh, I never
Right.
did actually get a diploma. I had to write my GED here a couple of years ago. Um, but I just, right out of grade 12, went into the Navy. You want to talk about out of the frying pan into the fire? Try that one.
Wow. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, heck, when I joined, I didn't even know we had a Navy. I was
But
living in the middle of the continent and never crossed my mind we might have one.
but what the way the world has changed since we were kids, because now as a parent, you have to be concerned about what your kids are learning in school. And now it's like, what do? It's like they're learning stuff that, what if you are a devout Catholic, devout Christian, evangelical, even Muslim, whatever religion, and you're thinking that does not coincide with my religion. I don't want my kids learning certain progressive ideologies when they're in school.
That's right.
And that's fair enough. When I was I go back as far, and you too, where the Gideons would come in and give us Bibles in public school, and that was normal in Protestant public schools in Canada.
They still put them in hotels.
Yeah, yeah, barely. I don't know if they still do, but maybe they do. But I mean, that was a common practice when I was a kid. And then by the time I was in high school, I guess, in the 80s, whatever, they stopped doing that. So they've taken religion out of the schools. Okay, fine. If you're going to take religion out of schools, then you can't insert progressivism into the schools, and that's not fair. It's like,
Well, in a way, it's its own religion.
it
I
is. Yeah.
mean, you take down the Ten Commandments and you put up the points of Karl Marx. Now they haven't actually, chiseled anything out of bronze and nailed it to the wall, but that's certainly uh, not relevant, but predominant in the way that a lot of teachers approach teaching. These are my kids. It takes a village. All this nonsense is nothing but socialism. What it takes to raise children are two parents living under the same roof, raising the children that they begat and brought into this world, supported by extended family. That's what it takes to raise children. And that has been undermined and trashed. And I know that there's going to be people tell me later, if they heard me just say that, oh, is that ever antique? That is so old and out of date. You know what? It might be, but it's still right. And look, I'm not casting dispersions on other people's lifestyles. If you're an adult, you get to choose how you live. But let's not
Right.
fool ourselves about what the best way to raise children is. That should be our standard, even if not all of us reach it. I
Yeah.
don't know how
And
we got here, but anyway.
yeah. But that podcast I was watching the other day, he showed a clip of a lady who was upset with some of the material that was being some of the books that were being presented as reading material in the classroom. And I think this was maybe a grades 7 or 8, maybe grade 9. I'm not sure, but
I think
somewhere in
I
the middle
saw
grade.
the same clip.
So the lady, she's at the school board meeting and she starts reading a passage from the book, and it's pretty
Right.
explicit. And then one of the conveners says, oh, "Excuse me, stop! Like there are kids here. We can't have you read this." And she says, "Well, that's my point."
That's exactly my point. I saw that clip. That's, oh my God, it was probably one of the most poignant moments I've seen, on YouTube or Facebook or wherever it was I saw it. But she demonstrated their own folly by simply
Yeah,
reading back to them what they were allowing in their classroom they would not allow their own kids to hear.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
come on, give me a break. This is nonsense. So going back to the whole thing, well, what's wrong with education? Okay, we've beat up on education. So the way to fix it, first of all, this bill that we're talking about with CRT at its core
Hmm.
is going to have several effects. For one thing, it's going to damage children that do not need to be damaged. No child needs to be damaged. And it's also going to further repel people into homeschooling because more and more people are saying, I don't like what they're teaching. You know what? If they stuck to the 3 R's, I'd be fine. Leave the philosophy and the religion to me and the sex ed and all that stuff to the families.
Right.
And other than basic biology, I don't want you going near this stuff. You want to talk about what makes a woman different than a man physiologically? Okay, fine. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't ever discuss anything along that line, but the point is that the intricacies of the intimacy of the human embrace is something that is best couched within the family, because that way you can answer them to the level they're at, right? Like when a 3-year-old says, where do babies come from? Dad goes, tell your mother, and your mother goes, beet red. And she said, well, uh, you know, uh, and gives them whatever answer she thinks is appropriate for the age of the child. She knows the child. The teacher doesn't know the child as well as the parents do. So leave that to them. And I can hear it already. Well, not everybody's that way. You know what? You're right. Not everybody is that way. But that is not our fault. We don't throw out something that's worked for 10,000 years just
Right.
because some people don't have the idyllic lifestyle that fits that mold. You
Yeah.
just, you do the best you can for the most of the people most of the time, because that's all you can ever do.
Yeah. The world is becoming a strange, sometimes scary place. I was at my local the swimming pool in my condo last year, and there's a young girl. See her there every once in a while, and she's like maybe about 11, 12 years old. And she was talking to her friends, and I wasn't eavesdropping. She was talking loud enough I could hear, and she
Yeah.
said to her friends something about, "Oh well, I don't know about you, but I'm binary or something like this." And I'm thinking, like, are you guys just saying that to joke? Are you serious? It's like, where are you getting these terms from? It's just like, I'm this and I'm binary and I'm non-binary, and it's like, wow. It's like I'm glad my kids are older, older now.
Yeah, believe me, now I worry about my grandkids. I've
Your
got 4 of
grandkids,
them.
that's the thing. Yeah, yeah,
Well, one will be here in around Easter. The other 3 are already with us, and I think that I really worry because I know what their lifestyles are like. And look, when you've got 3 little ones under 5, under 8, it's a handful. Like when I came down from Sioux Lookout, I stayed with my daughter for a while before I got back into the farmhouse. But I would watch her try to herd them kids out the door every morning to go to school, or mornings when snow days came along, or one of them was sick or something like that. And it was chaos.
mm,
And, I reminded me of just how stressful being a parent can be, because now that my kids are older, I'm not under that kind of stress anymore.
right.
As most people know, we had 8, and the youngest one is now going to be 18 this year, and which blows my mind because guess what? That makes me. That's called old. Anyway, she was just here a little while ago, brought me some supper. So thank you, Gabby
Oh,
Mac. Appreciate it. Anyway, and they're all great kids, but I can't imagine living in a city and having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, you have to make choices about how much you're going to expose your kids to and when. And only
right.
the parents are in the best position to make that call. And I am a big parental rights advocate. I think that DeSantis in Florida has it exactly right. If I could pluck a politician from anywhere in the world right now and drop him in as prime minister or even premier, I'd pick him because
Yeah,
he's not afraid of the media. He stands up and tells it like it is, and he is on the right side of these issues.
yeah,
This whole
and
go
whether you
ahead.
agree with him or not, he's taking a stand. He took a stand against Disney, and
Oh,
he was
God,
doing a press conference the other day, and he says this parental rights bill is something that I believe that the parents of Florida want and need. And he says, I am going to stand here against any woke corporation. He didn't say
yeah.
Disney by name, but he said any woke corporation that wants to go against me, that's fine. He says, here I stand. I'm signing this bill. And wow, you got to, you don't see very many politicians with that kind of courage and that kind of backbone. And if people
You
don't
know,
want to vote for him next time, then don't vote for him. But at least he's taking his stand.
but you know what? I think people will, and I'll tell you why. Because especially here in Canada, we have been crying for real leadership for 20 years or more. We've gone from one marshmallow politician to the other. And the worst one is now reigning supreme in this country. I mean, Justin Trudeau couldn't get a job selling used socks with holes in them if it was up to me. Okay. But he's the prime minister and he's one of the worst in our history. And I think that what Canadians, people in general, but specifically Canadians, have been longing for somebody to come along, stand up, and do what Ronald Reagan did. This is who I am. This is what I believe in. Come and follow me, and then turn and lead and not look over his shoulder to see who's coming. And that's one of the reasons why he won 4 major victories at the polls, landslide elections, all of them. 2 as governor of California and 2 as president. He was one of the
Right.
most successful politicians, whether you like them or not. You can't argue with that. That the United States has ever produced. He could
Yeah.
speak the common tongue. People got him and they understood him. And the media went nuts. They hated it because they couldn't filter his message.
Yeah. And Christina just had a comment asking if is this bill only in Florida or are other states following as well? As far as I know, it's only right now in Florida, but
Other
I
states are
imagine
enacting similar
there,
legislation.
yeah, so there's probably going to be other states following along eventually because it seems like when DeSantis does something, other governors tend to pick it up.
They
So
see what happens. People flock to this guy.
yeah,
Why do you think when Pierre Poilievre came to Ottawa here recently? Now, look, whether you like Pierre or not is not the point. He's one of the few voices that is, standing up and saying, I don't think he's just saying it because he thinks that's what people want to hear. I think he actually believes it. But he's saying what needs to be said. There were 1,000 people at a political rally, and it wasn't for a general election. It was just for the leadership race of the Conservative Party. A
right,
thousand people turned out. You know, now I don't want to see a coronation. I want him to have to fight for it. But
right.
if he wins, fine, I can live with that because at least you know where he stands. And that's what people respect. They may not agree with you 100% on everything. Nobody does. Even my wife won't agree with me all the time. Matter of fact, not even most.
Not even some of the time.
Well, once in a while. But generally speaking, people admire and respect someone who has conviction and is willing to put themselves out on a limb for it. And Pierre does that. There's no argument. So does Roman Babar, by the way. He's the other one that I really like in this race. What are his
Yeah, I haven't
chances?
had Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to all the candidates yet, but we'll get around to it. There's lots of runway to go still
Yep.
um, in that race. It's going to be very
But the
interesting. It
airplane
makes
is gathering speed.
Yeah, is he ever? Is he ever?
Yep. So that that's the point I was making there is that with this parental rights bill, he who votes it in is going to have to pay a pretty heavy price. At least I certainly hope so. Um, I don't want this stuff is so toxic and so damaging
Yeah,
uh, to people, little kids like my little Emily. Okay, she's 4. What does she need to hear this stuff for?
that's right. Yeah.
She's a little girl. Let her be a little girl. My
So
grandson Sailor I call him Sailor. His name is Sam. He's 2.5, almost 3. He doesn't need that stuff. Even when he's 5 or 6 or 7 or 10, he doesn't need that stuff. He's a little boy. Let him be a little boy. The
let
world will
kids be
strip
kids.
their innocence soon enough.
Exactly. Yeah. Let them have their childhood. Let them be innocent. We had that privilege as we were when we were kids. So why don't rob today's kids of their innocence? Let
When
them
you
be
were
kids.
10 years old, or let's say 8 years old, if you remember back that far, I have foggy memories of it.
Yeah.
What was the most important thing in the world to you?
Hanging out with my friends, playing in the park, hanging out with my brothers. Those other things weren't even on my radar because I mean those things didn't exist really. Like who was binary or whatever, or what kind of relationship my teachers were in. It's like that wasn't even on my radar. I was just playing with my friends and
Let's be
watching
honest, Chris.
cartoons on
When you and I were that age, you hadn't even invented radar yet.
Saturday morning.
But in
Yeah,
my case, I grew up on a farm. So the biggest thing I had to worry about was get on my bike, and there was this willow tree that had a root stuck out of the ground. And I would ride at that root as fast as I could pedal and jump it over that root. That was
right,
my whole world. That and um, I had a hockey net in the barn and a tennis ball and a hockey stick. And I would put 1 quart cans in the corners, try to pick the corners like Bobby Orr was doing.
right.
Just he was my hockey hero when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But that was it. I didn't know anything about girls were icky. I mean, at that age, I learned they weren't icky later,
Yeah,
but
that's right. Yeah,
that's a whole different story. But there was I look back on that and I pine for that innocence. When you didn't have
yeah.
a care in the world. The biggest day of my life was when I was 12. My dad handed me. He reached under the Christmas tree and pulled it out, a 22 caliber rifle with a 17 round magazine, a tube,
Whoa.
and he handed it to me and said, "If you shoot it, you're going to eat it."
Hmm.
In other words, don't be shooting birds out of the air. You want to
Huh.
shoot pop cans? You want to shoot, you know, light bulbs? You want to do whatever? Target practice? Knock yourself out. If you want to shoot a rabbit, if you can get one, fine, but you're gonna eat it. This
Ah,
is not a toy. You treat it with respect. And if I ever catch you using it in a way I don't think is safe, I will boot your butt up between your shoulder blades. And you know what? I believed them.
yeah.
So,
It's interesting that you mentioned that because the times have really changed. And once again, I'm going to date myself, but I remember I was like, what, 5 years old, and uh, my dad worked for CMHC, Central Mortgage and Housing
yep,
Corporation. And I remember that's one of my earliest memories is going to their Christmas party, and they always had gifts for the kids. And I think that's where
right.
I got like a toy gun, and it looked like a real pistol. Like if you had
Is
that
it the
today,
safety pump action
just like
repeater?
no, just like a small handgun. But I mean, back
Oh
then,
yeah, the cap gun.
you could you could give a kid a toy gun and nobody would say anything, and you walk around the street and playing with your friends and shooting. Can you imagine that today? A kid with a
Cowboys and
gun in his hand,
Indians.
like whoa,
Oh my God, you'd be hauled off to jail for child abuse.
yeah,
And yet, something that this is part of what we've lost is this ability to let kids use their imagination. And also, one of the things I think we should do, and where this is going, I have no idea. But I think there should be a firearm safety course in every high school in the country. It teaches kids two things: respect for firearms and to figure out what's real and what is Hollywood. Because the only place people have to get firearms information now in the masses, okay, is Hollywood. You watch
right,
people wield firearms and do things with a pistol Like, how many times have I seen a gunfight on TV where somebody drops somebody else 100 yards away with a pistol?
Right.
Well, guess what? 15 yards away, you can't hit the broadside of a barn with a pistol.
Hmm.
The barrel's not long enough. It doesn't have the accuracy. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole. But I
Yeah.
think looking at the clock, we have blown right through our break. So let's take a quick little break. We'll come back and we'll deal with the final segment right after this. It's the Nick and Joe
Will do.
show, folks. Stick around. We'll be right back with more.
Okay.
There we are. All right.
Yes.
The Nick and Joe show. We've got about, what's that, about 20 minutes left?
20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Um,
I want to talk about Elon Musk and his
yeah,
buying
yeah.
shares, stake in
Let's do
Twitter.
that.
Yeah.
Let's do
I'm
that.
a big free speech proponent, and in a future show, we're going to have to dedicate like a whole half an hour segment to free speech itself. But
Sure.
I think this was great news this week, and I'm reading from a Los Angeles Times article online here. It says, with his new purchase of a 9% stake in Twitter, Elon Musk isn't just diversifying his investment portfolio. The Tesla chief executive is also deepening his entanglement with one of America's foremost venues for public discourse, potentially hinting at future ambitions to influence the platform's handling of free speech, content moderation, and digital censorship. So, this is a good news story for people like you and I who strongly believe in free speech, which means that people like you and I, Nick, we believe that even people who strongly disagree with us, who have opposing opinions, should be able to express those opinions freely, and then we can debate them and take their arguments apart. But free speech is something that we are slowly losing bit by bit, and we need to bring it back, or else we are done as a society.
Well, two things. First of all, did you know that Elon Musk is a Canadian?
Nope.
Yep, he's Canadian, which explains a lot.
Where was
The
he born
accent.
here or just raised here or what? Is this a joke?
No, I'm serious.
Oh,
I don't know much more than that, but I do know he's Canadian. Where he's from, what part of the country he's from, I don't know yet.
okay. I have to
But
Google this now.
yeah, we'll have to Google that and find out. But the other thing is, there's an old saying that says, um, if I had no right except the right of free speech, with free speech I could win back all my rights, which is very true. The dealing with Elon Musk himself, this is a brilliant move. He's flushing out all the hardcore lefties and socialists who have been trying to set up things like Twitter, so that it look, if you're a conservative on Twitter, you're going to pay the price. They don't like conservatives. They don't like people who don't share their worldview. And anytime you express yourself as one, you're going to get it. And he's starting to drive them out. One guy resigned, saying, "Look, if he's working here, I'm gone because, I've worked too hard, and I don't like what he stands for." And I'm thinking, fine, don't let the door hit you on the way out, because I like this guy, and I will. He's the world's wealthiest man, but he's also, people like him are so eccentric. He's come up with some really wild ideas. But if you look back at the great innovators and the great thinkers over history, they're all like that. They
Yeah,
all
they're
have.
all a bit off center. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
In World War I, he wanted to put what became torpedo bulges on the sides of battleships so that U-boats couldn't sink them. Now, at the time, that was outrageous because they didn't have that technology. Guess what they did in World War II? They did the same thing. A lot of they had extra, maybe not bulges like double hulls, but they had extra belt armor along the waterline and just below the waterline to absorb the impact from torpedoes. And he was just way ahead of his time. You look at Tesla. You look at not J.P. Morgan, the other guy, Edison. You look at Alexander Graham Bell. All these people, Michelangelo, for crying out loud, designing an airplane based on a bird. He tried it. Somebody tried it and it didn't go well. he had wings like a bird and a tail like a bird. He jumped off a cliff and he felt like a bird. That was the end of that.
We got some information from John. He says Musk arrived in Canada in June 1989 and lived with a second cousin in Saskatchewan for a year, working odd jobs at a farm and lumber mill. I did not know that, but he was born in South Africa. Born in South Africa, moved to Canada later, and became an American citizen. So
I knew
I learned a little bit
now, but I didn't know about the South African angle.
Yeah, that's where he was born.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. See, this is why we hired him. Fill in the gaps in what we don't know, and there's plenty of gaps to fill, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But get back to Elon. He's the kind of guy. Look, what are you going to do to the guy? I mean, he's the world's wealthiest man. So you're not going to bribe him. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get to him with women. He could buy the whole Miss America pageant or the Miss Universe pageant and get any woman he wants. So that's not going to work. He's almost, dare I say, he's altruistic because he can afford to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense in a way. Yeah. But but there are a lot of people in his position, though, who would say, you know what, I'm very wealthy. I'm just going to enjoy my wealth and, build my little rocket ships to go up in space with others, and I'm not going to worry about the whole free speech thing or libertarian thing. I'm glad he's not like that, because he is speaking up. He even spoke up about the trucker convoy. I think
he did.
Freedom Convoy.
He supported it,
and he didn't have to do that, but he was. You can say it was courageous, because once again, it's easier just to stay out of the fray and not say anything, make your millions, and just keep your mouth shut. So I like that libertarian bent that he has. I hope he keeps it up. And obviously, with buying shares in Twitter, he's got something up his sleeve.
Obviously, and it's already beginning to bear fruit. Not only he's the biggest shareholder, he's now a member of the board of directors. So he has he's the largest shareholder at 7.3% or 6.7. I forget what the number is. It doesn't look that big, but it's the biggest. So when the biggest shareholder sits down at a board meeting, the people who are in that board meeting are going to listen, because
Right.
it's in their economic benefit. It's to their what's the word I'm looking for? To their advantage to do so.
Right.
So I'm really, at first I thought he was just a wacko nutcase. Like when he talked about putting high speed subways under LA, where you drop your car in a vacuum tube and whoosh across the thing,
Yeah.
or you'd park
Yeah.
it up like this or something. I forget the whole story, but he had this wild idea. Who knows?
Mhm.
Maybe he can make it work. I don't know, but I do know he decided he was going to send private citizens into space on rockets you could recover and reuse. Guess what? He did it, and he's done
Yeah.
it more than once. So, anyway, it's 9.2%. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah.
Craig's comment.
Thanks, Craig.
Um, he makes a good point. We can speak out in our voices when no one can hurt us. You know, a lot of that comes from the anonymity that we get when you're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever platform. You know, you could put in any name you want and just be whoever you want and snap off, really snarky remarks and not worry about the backlash. Elon Musk
Yeah.
doesn't have that luxury because
Yeah.
everybody knows who Elon is. He was actually, one of the things I admired about him was during this whole gas price crisis,
Right.
here's a guy who makes electric cars for a living. And he said, you need to pump more oil. We need to get the cost of
Yeah.
energy down. Now,
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that it from a guy who makes electric cars? Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
that was my
Good point.
point.
Good
You
point.
think you want to take advantage of that situation to make more
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
But at some point, money isn't, it's not about the money anymore. And I
No.
think this is probably true in his case too. Money is just a way of keeping score now. Like, what
Yeah.
can I accomplish if I take this amount of money and I put it over here? What can I do with it? What can I? And in his case, I think he's doing that too, but not in the way that a lot of people would. He's trying. He's at a point in his life where all his personal needs have long since been taken care of. The
Right.
guy's got more money than all the countries in the world, and well, maybe not, but he certainly is the wealthiest individual on the planet. So money to him is no big deal. He doesn't even carry a pen. You want him to
Is that
sign
right?
a check, then he'll pull out the checkbook. You better have the pen. It's just that way. But with him, he's to a point now where he can say, what cause do I feel like supporting? What makes sense? And I'll bet you some of it, at least because our past experiences make us who we are. That time on the farm in Saskatchewan may have
Hmm.
given him a grounding others didn't get. And
That's a really good point. When you come from when you either you come from humble beginnings, or if you've had to work, work the soil or work in a lumber yard or
by the
whatever,
sweat of your brow, that's
it
right.
it affects you. And I know when I left high school, I worked in a office supply stock room. Okay, it's not like working in the you know a lumber yard, but I mean, like, you're getting up every morning, you're going to the stock room, you're lifting boxes off the truck, stocking the shelves, and I kind of liked it. And there's something character building about that. And then I
Right.
transitioned to an easy desk job in the government. But I'm glad I did the stockroom thing first, because I think that it's kind of like a bit of a character builder. And just like my son actually worked at Rona Warehouse during his high school years. And I would
Right.
stop by and see him working in the stone yard on a hot summer day. And he was just sweating and everything. And just, and there's a part of me that felt sorry for him. But then there's a part of me that thought, hey, that's my boy. He's learning how to work with his hands. And this is not a
Yeah,
cushy job. He'll appreciate working in an office later on in life. And that's what he's
that's
doing
right.
now. Yeah.
Well, I've said for a long time that the further we get from our agrarian roots, the worse our culture gets. And I think there's plenty of evidence to back that up. When you have to, like here on the farm, I've got the wood stove going. I had to go and cut the tree down. I had to split the firewood. And I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, poor me. This is
Right.
just the process. Okay. There's something satisfying about doing manual labor. So when you have 4 or 5 cords of wood in a woodshed, you can look at it and say, I did that. That's there because I put the effort in. And that's going to keep my family warm during the wintertime. And there's a certain sense of pride and accomplishment that you don't get ticking off boxes on a computer screen doing paperwork for the government. I'm not picking on you specifically, but in general,
Yeah.
there's something about the agrarian lifestyle that lends itself to character building, and
Right.
it's you have to there's out here in the country you cannot afford bad ideas. If you were to go back 150 years ago and try some of the policies that we have now, people would literally die. That's why they weren't done. It's not that the technology held them back, okay, because philosophy does not depend on technology. But when you were given a piece of land in a land grant, okay, you had 2 years. You had to clear 40 acres, build a domicile, and put a crop in the ground.
Yeah.
Certainly in this area. Well, if you've ever been out in the Wilno Hills, putting a crop in the ground is a mighty tall order because they have a lot of what I call Polish potatoes in the ground. Those are granite boulders. So you have to move them one at a time and hope you can find enough ground to put underneath and around them so you can put potatoes in. If that don't work, you got to raise cattle because it's the only thing you can really grow around here. And people did that and worked like dogs, but they were some of the salt of the earth people. You could stand in front of them and you could pee in their boots and they knew it wasn't raining.
Yeah. You know, I didn't know that much about Elon Musk a few years ago, but I think I started to pay attention to him about 2 years ago when I think the main Tesla factory was in California. And then didn't he
Mm-hmm.
say he was going to move the factory out of California to Texas? I think that's so. At that point, I thought, hey, I like this guy.
Well, he
He's
got
saying, hey, you
tired
know
of
what?
saying,
If you're gonna have all these taxes, I think it was during the pandemic actually, at the start of the pandemic, and they said you couldn't. He had to shut down the factory or because of
yep.
the pandemic protocols, the whatever. And then he said, okay, I'm just going to move my factory to another state. So he's big enough he can do that. But it's just like, you know what? The heck with you, California. I can move my plant somewhere else.
I'm not
So
playing
go
this game.
ahead. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the luxury. You know what? This is why I think more people should be independently wealthy. I don't begrudge the wealthy a penny. Most of them worked really hard for it. Yeah, there's some silver spoon kids out there, no doubt. But the vast majority of people who have any amount of wealth at all worked damn hard to get it. And they didn't stab everybody in the back on the way up. There's that
right.
a certain group of people who believe that. That is not true. I've known enough people in my life who are far wealthier than I will ever be who did exactly the opposite. They were the ones who took the risk. They were the ones who made sure their employees were taken care of. Just an example, uh, there was a guy who runs an airline that I know of rather well. Uh,
Mhm.
Walked into my wife's office and said, "If I could get you down to Central Ontario, could you make it to the Ottawa Valley? I can't get you to Ottawa, but I can get you down to Kitchener. And Kitchener is only 5 hours from the farm. So look, it's 24. So
Okay.
he put her on an airplane. She got in it. She got to fly the airplane, got to Kitchener, borrowed her friend's van who happened to live in Kitchener, and drove up here for the weekend. He didn't have to do that. And yet it was because he was wealthy, he was able to.
Right.
It's because he has the resources where it didn't matter. He didn't charge her a nickel for it. So, these are the
Yeah.
kind of things you can do when you have money.
Exactly. Exactly. And you're right. Not every wealthy person has a heart of gold, but a lot of them do. And I don't begrudge somebody, as you said, who has worked hard and invested their time and energy and built up a large business. They deserve the fruits of the labor. They
Absolutely.
put the effort into it. And perhaps like if they, going back to the whole Elon Musk thing, I mean, in Twitter, you look at a guy like Donald Trump, and it's like, well, if you can censor the president of the United States and say you're kicked off our platform, then you can
There's
censor
something
anybody.
wrong.
But I
That's
mean,
right.
like Donald Trump was okay. Everybody knows him as a rich real estate entrepreneur, but he inherited some of his wealth, the business from his dad. But he took that business and really did something with it. So
It's like being
he,
handed the keys to a Ferrari.
Yeah,
That works. Okay, you can have the Ferrari, but you got to know how to drive it.
that's
Otherwise,
right.
it's not a heap of junk wrapped around a pole.
Yeah,
And this is I can I have a certain amount of respect for anyone who can take an investment and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar organization. The Walmart family takes a lot of grief, but they also employ a tremendous amount of people and contribute a huge amount of money to the income tax bracket, income tax man down in the United States and here in Canada too. Those
yeah.
people, everybody grumbles about working at Walmart. Oh, they don't pay it. Well, you don't have to work there. But if you do,
By,
it's not hard to get a job there either.
by the way, I used to work with a guy in the government years ago, and I remember he was a very big union guy. I was in the union too, but this guy said, "Oh, he says I don't shop at Walmart because they're not unionized and blah blah blah." So this fellow who said that, he ended up leaving the government. He moved out to the East Coast, the Maritimes, and he was there for about a year. And the next thing you know, he's posting on Facebook. He says, "Hey, I just got a job at Walmart." It's like you're the guy that was anti-Walmart a couple of years ago, and now you're saying you're going to go work for Walmart. Ah, how things have
We'll have to
changed.
do a union show sometime because I can tell you some horror stories. Oh boy. Anyway, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. We're just about done for tonight. But it's been an entertaining show for Chris. Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
It's
And
been
I
fun.
hope people found it entertaining and informative. Please, if you're listening to this, let your MP know or your MPP know that you, under no circumstances, want Bill 67 to pass. We didn't even get a chance to talk about the one from we'll do that next week about
Yeah,
the internet
free
bill.
speech, internet. Yeah,
Free,
yeah, that's
yeah,
important.
the one I was going down the rabbit hole earlier and realized I was babbling like an idiot, not talking about the same topic. We'll get to that.
That's an important topic, Nick, because if the things don't go the right way, we might not have this show anymore because they'll ban us for talking about things we shouldn't talk about.
Well, then we'll grab a 1-ton Ford van. We'll drive down to Syracuse, New York. We'll put a 25-watt transmitter in it. We'll do free Canada radio.
Yeah. I say that jokingly, but this is something that we have to really be concerned about in Canada. Like we
It's
don't want
funny,
to
but
lose
it's not.
our platforms to be able to speak out on topics that are important to speak about.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to put up with this for the next 2 or 3 years. So here we go. All right, Chris, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. And for the rest of you, I really hope you enjoyed the show. We certainly are trying to make it better every week. I want to thank the Milkman, Mr. Melky, for his technical assistance. It's always a pleasure to work with him. He's been a real big boost to the show. So thank you, Mr. Melky. I appreciate that. And for the rest of you, oh, there he is. Yeah, thumbs up, buddy. Thumbs up. For the rest of you, I wish you all a great week, and we'll see you all again next weekend. In the meantime, ubi caritas et amor, Dea sibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may have a fair wind in the following sea.